Permaitu sinyal.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
warahmatullahi
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
We are from group 2, and we would explain about psychological mechanism. Before that, let me introduce our member. My name is Lulul Marati. My friend is Anggun Cahanaya, Riki Fahreza, Elma Dwita Puji, Aulia Salsabila, Bunga Lestari, and Fidhliya Akrima. The first presentation would be presented by Elma.
Okay, thank you, Lulu. Introduction. Psychological mechanism are the mechanism involved in language use. Psychological mechanisms are processing and system or activities and entities that are often used in causal explanation in psychology. This mechanism provides the basis for an integrated understanding of language use. Language processing is a combined product of linguistic principle and psychological mechanism. In this chapter consists of three parts. First, present an overview of human information processing system. Second, apply concept more directly language processing and examine the set of problems that arise in text. Third, sketch the development of processing system and examine questions about which part of system might be present at a time when most children learn their mother tongue. The discussion in chapter 2 gives us an insight into the psychology of language. This perspective emphasizes the structure linguistic of the phrase structure, characteristic, and morphological structure. In this, so it is clear that this perspective has enriched our knowledge of human cognitive functioning and will continue to do so. This presentation will be presented by Akrima.
Yes, okay, thank you, Elma. The next slide is about the information processing system. The study of memory has a long history in psychology. The first systematic studies of memory were performed in the late 19th century. William James anticipated the contemporary distinction between working and long-term memory, which he called primary and secondary memory. In his landmark book, Principle of Psychology. Contemporary study of memory and information processing began in the late 1950s, and the field of memory study and language study have exerted a synergistic effect no one another ever since. In this section of the chapter, we will examine the two main constructs in contemporary memory theory. There are working memory and long-term memory. We will also discuss two aspects of long-term memory. There are semantic memory and episodic memory. Next slide, please. Okay, the first is working memory. Working memory has been defined as referring to the temporary storage of information that is being processed in any range of cognitive by Fidhliya 1986. Many cognitive processes require that we hold on to information for a short period of time. As an even simple example is, think of trying to remember a phone number that is spoken to you as you dial it. We need to hold the digit somewhere for a short period of time, and that and then somewhere has been termed working memory. Working memory is measured in several ways, and the most simple is a memory span test or simple span test, in which participants are given a series of items, words, letters, number, and so forth, and asked to recall the item in the order presented. Sometimes they ask to recall them in backward order. A person memory span is the number of items that can be reliably recalled in the correct order. This is simple test not only is a common method in psychological experiment, but also included in the most commonly used intelligence tests. And then the first is the Bedley-Hitch model. Bedley and Hitch propose a model of working memory which has subsequently been revised a number of times. The model has three components that called the central executive, the visual spatial sketchpad, and the phonological loop. The latter two systems are sometimes referred to as slave system to the central executive. Next. The first of model is phonological loop. Phonological loop consists of the phonological star and the articulatory rehearsal system. The phonological star holds phonological representation for a brief period of time. The model assumes that there are phonological representation of both auditory and visual materials. That is, when visual materials such as printed letters are presented, we may convert them into phonological representation and thus hold them into phonological star. And then the two of model is visual spatial sketchpad. Visual spatial sketchpad temporarily maintains in and manipulates visual spatial information. This is the system that allows us to form visual image, rotate them in our minds, convert words into image, and so on. And the third is central executive. The central executive was initially conveyed as a limited capacity pool of general processing research. That is, that we are limited in terms of the number of things we can do at once. Many things we can simultaneously do effectively depends on the amount of research. For example, we can watch TV and drink coffee at the same time, but it is more difficult to say or talking, carry on a conversation while doing arithmetic problem in our heads. It is assumed that the central executive exerts executive control, that is, determines what activities the slave system should be doing at any given time. Thus, the executive can assign the phonological loop to verbally rehearse some material. The notion of executive control is a little vague for some psychologists' preference, but it can be touched as a simply a term for some function that we believe exists, but have not yet been fully explored. Okay, next. The second is test of models that have been tested in phonological experiment. For a review, see Respect 2006. First is model predict that when people make error in working memory tasks, the error tend to be in the direction of similar sign. Suppose a person were presented with a series of letters visually. And then the second is What might happen if a person had to remember letter while at the same time speaking some sound over and over? The assumption that investigators have made is that such tasks occupy the articulatory loop, thus reducing possibility that the loop can be used to rehearse the letter to be remembered. By Bedley and Hitch in 1974, the second task leads to articulatory suppression, which in return leads to reduced memory overall and in particular reduction in similar sound errors. And then the third is the number of words remembered in a memory span. Study are related to the length of the word, which is called the word length effect. By Bedley 2002, notes that the phonological loop may help explain certain deficit on working memory. In contrast, individuals with brain damage that impairs central rehearsal show poor memory span. On balance, this research strongly suggests that the Bedley and Hitch model is on the right track with regard to the articulatory loop. Next, please. The conception of the central executive is that it controls attention, and thus we might expect that tasks that involve divided attention might be easier for those with larger working memories. Some representative study of central executive data first by Denman and Carpenter in 1980 studied the relationship between working memory span and reading comprehension. And then the second is, if the executive portion of working memory is responsible for allocating attention to different tasks or stimuli, it would seem likely that tasks that require divided attention would be more difficult for those with smaller working memories. And then the third of study of central executive is evidence indicate that individuals with a strong working memory perform better on an anticipated task. Okay, the next slide will be presented by Reza.
Okay, thank you. Now, there are slide long-term memory. Long-term memory is defined as a memory structure that holds permanent knowledge. Dolphin 1972 suggests that we should distinguish between two aspects of long-term memory. There are episodic memory and semantic memory. Okay, now there are semantic memory and episodic memory. Jadi kita bahas secara umum dulu ya. Maksud di sini episodic memory yaitu refers to our organized knowledge of personal knowledge or experience. Maksudnya di episodik ini fakta yang dialami secara pribadi atau pengalaman pribadi. Nah, kemudian semantik ini fakta atau pengetahuan umum yang dipelajari sendiri. Jadi berbeda ya. Oke, langsung saja. Apa sih itu episodik memory? Episodik ini banyak mengeksplorasi antara pengetahuan dan pengalaman. Seperti Piaget and Hilder dan Nielsen, ada 3 orang yang menyatakan pengetahuan dan pengalaman itu berbeda. Nielsen ini menyatakan bahwa ada jalur pembentukan memori telah mengungkapkan fakta, yaitu ada 2 jalur terpisah untuk mekanisme psikolog, yaitu yang salah satunya adalah kenangan atau pengalaman hidup yang ada di sekitar orang. dan melibatkan unsur waktu. Nah, yang satunya lagi, pengetahuan yang diperoleh secara intelektual, tidak dialami tetapi dipelajari melalui studi ataupun bukan secara pribadi. Tulving 1972 or 2002 itu bertanggung jawab atas kemajuan konstruksi memori episodik. Jadi Tulving ini mengidentifikasi perbaikan dalam teori sebagai tanggapan terhadap kritikan. Dan kemudian semantik. Semantik ini tadi artinya pengetahuan umum yang mengacu tentang terorganisir kata-kata, konsep, simbol, atau objek yang mencangkup kelas informasi yang luas seperti keterampilan motorik, mengetik, atau apapun itu, pengetahuan umum seperti aritmatika, pengetahuan spasial, bukan spesial, yaitu tentang petak rumah dan keterampilan sosial. Itu bagaimana cara memulai dan mengakhiri percakapan. Nah, relevansi memori ini cukup jelas bahwa untuk mengolah bahasa kita perlu memiliki pengetahuan tentang bahasa yang tersemat di memori semantik kita. Yang tadi disebutkan yaitu tidak dialami tetapi dipelajari. Nah, ya habis, apa masih? Masih ya, oke. Studi kalian relevan mengeksplorasi proses kognitif individu yang sangat terampil pada tugas tertentu seperti bermain catur atau musik. Dalam sebuah studi klasik ini membandingkan kemampuan master catur tadi yang pemula dalam mengingat posisi bidik catur. Ketika catur itu diatur dalam konfigurasi yang bermakna, berkemungkinan terjadi pertandingan catur dan para ahli mengingat lebih banyak bidak daripada pemula. Seperti itu. Jadi tadi episodik memori ini urusan fakta atau urusan pengalaman pribadi, dan semantik ini pelajaran atau pengetahuan umum. Oke, next. Relevance for language process. Working memory can only hold about 7 units of information, but since many sentences are longer than this, we need a way to deal with more than 7 words immediately. One way of doing this is by dividing words into grammatical constituents such as phrases, nouns, and verbs. 3B reduction the storage load to perhaps two or 3 constituents. The working memory processing function is used to organize words into the constituent. Semantic memory, constant information about speech, sound, and word that we pick up during pattern recognition. In addition, we need to build an episodic memory representation of the ongoing discourse. This means that after we finish processing a particular sentence, we may extract the core and store it in episodic memory. Some processing can happen or it might happen in a certain way. Okay, please, next speaker.
Okay. Serial parallel processing.
Serial processing is a group of processes takes place one at a time. For example, when you're reading the sentence, you can process all the words in one place. Instead, you read them in sequence from left to right. Next. Parallel processing is two or more of the processes take place simultaneously. For example, when a person sees an object, they don't see just one thing, rather many different aspects that together help the person identify the object as whole. Next. Top-down and bottom-up processes. Bottom-up processing as that which process from the lowest level to the highest level of processing in such a way that all of the lower levels of processing operate without influence from the higher levels. For example, if you see an image of an individual letter on your screen, your eyes transmit the information to your brain, and your brain puts all of this information together. Next, top-down processing model. In contrast, states that information at the higher levels may influence processing at the lower levels. For example, suppose they receive an important letter, but a few drops of water have smeared part of the text. A few letters in different words are now just smug. Next presentation will be presented by Lulu.
Thank you, Dwita. I will explain about automatic and control.
Sorry, Akrima, your voice is not clear.
Okay, sorry. I will explain about automatic and control. Automatic process doesn't require us to pay attention, nor do we have to put in effort to control automatic process. Automatic process occurs without us giving much to it. And in other words, we actually have to think about what is going on and make decisions. We are in control of this process. For example, when we first learned how to ride a bike, we had to pay attention to what we were doing. We had to be consciously aware of where the brakes were, where the pedals are located, how to stop, how to steer the bike, etc. We processfully paid attention to all of these things, and we put forth the effort to learn how to ride a bike. Some other examples of control processing include the first time a person drives a car, writing a letter to a friend, and answering interview questions. Control processing is international done while we are consciously aware of what we are doing. For example, as an experienced bike rider, you may be able to do many bike riding tasks, and then you can steer, brake, react to cars on the road, and change speed because all of the years of practice have made it possible for you to do these things automatically without being consciously aware of what you are doing. And then next slide, please. For modularity, the issue of modularity has two meanings. The first meaning, it pertains to the degree of independence of the language processing system. The modularity position is that the language processing system is a unique set of cognitive abilities that cannot be reduced to general principle of cognition. And then the second meaning of modularity is that linguistic subsystems, such as semantic and syntax, operate independently rather than interactively. And for example, a modular view of how we comprehend sentences that we apply syntactic principles first and then utilize semantic knowledge. The interactive position is that both semantics and syntax are used simultaneously. And the next presentation will be presented by Lulu.
Lulu. Okay, thank you, Akrima. I would explain about an example of language processing. This is the example of language processing. I was afraid of Ali's powerful punch, especially since it had already laid out many taller men who had bragged they could handle that much alcohol. The key word here is punch, which can mean either an alcoholic beverage or a boxing punch. The subjective impression for most people at the end of the sentence is having assumed the wrong meaning and then backtracking. Next. Next, please. Yeah, this is still about example of language processing. If we were to flesh this out, if we were want to flesh this out into a more complete processing model, it might look like this. First, when we encounter a word that has more than a meaning, we survey the immediate environment of the word. And the second, make a rapid decision as the most appropriate meaning and then stay with that meaning unless it becomes obvious that we are an error. Next. Okay, next is about development of memory. Development of working memory. Working memory is the retention of a small amount of information in a readily accessible form. It facilitates planning, comprehension, reasoning, and problem solving. Next. The component of working memory. First, the central executive. In the central executive is data arrives either from the sense or from the long-term memory or LTM, and then the central executive acts as a conductor and directs the attention to particular tasks and allocates data to the different slave systems. Second is the central executive has a very limited capacity and can't do too many things at once. Next, the phonological loop. The phonological loop is subdivided into two parts. First, the phonological store and the articulatory process. Next, the phonology store, or inner ears, holds information in speech beds from and allows acoustically encoded items to be held for a brief period of time. The articulatory process, or inner voice, allows subvocal repetitions of items stored in the phonological store. This is a form of maintenance rehearsal. Next, the last is the visual-spatial sketchpad, also known as an inner eye. This is component of the WMM, or working memory model, is used when you have to mentally plan a special task like getting from one room to another. It stores visual and spatial information and is also responsible for setting up and manipulating mental image. It has a limited capacity, and much like phonological loop, it is subdivided into two parts, the inner scribe and the visual cage or store. The visual cage deals with the storage of information. The inner scribe acts as a rehearsal mechanism. The next presentation will be presented by Bunga.
Okay, thank you, Lulu. Development of long-term memory. Development of semantic memory. Piaget, 1952, claimed that children's thinking processes are qualitatively different from those of adults. Adults do not merely think faster or more accurately than children, but in a different way. Piaget referred to the concept that we use to organize our experience as schema. A well-documented example is object permanence, which refers to children's understanding that objects continue to exist even when they cannot be perceived. Okay, next. The acquisition of object permanence is not an isolated cognitive skills. At about this time, two related skills are emerging. One is pretend play or fantasy play. They will use objects in play similar to how adults would use them. For example, when infants are 12 months old or so, putting spoons in their mouths. At about 8 months, combing a doll's hair with a toy rake. This is a symbolic play. It suggests that infants can understand that one object can stand for or represent another. The second skill is different imitation, in which the child imitates a behavior seen sometime before. A famous example is from Piaget's daughter, Jacqueline, who observed a tantrum in a playmat and then imitated it very closely a day later. These two developments, along with object permanence, define the transition from the earliest period of development, the sensory motor period, to the second period called pre-operational period. Pulling these strands together, then it appears that infants are developing the ability to represent the world around the period of 18 to 24 months. Okay, next. Development of episodic memory. Episodic memory is understanding the world from a personal viewpoint. The studies touch on the ability of young children to understand that they are distinct from other persons and that their perspective is thus different and necessarily personal. One way to assess infants' self-awareness is to give them the opportunity to recognize themselves in a mirror. Wheeler et al. Conclude that episodic memory does not develop until about 4 years of age. These observations have relevance for the concept of childhood amnesia. Childhood amnesia, sometimes called infantile amnesia, refers to the inability of adults to remember experiences from the first few years of life. Most people cannot recall events before their third birthday. Next, development of long-term memory. First, implication for language acquisition. First, working memory appears to be closely related to the acquisition of new words. The ability to acquire words that refer to object in the word requires one to simultaneously maintain the object and its name in working memory. Second, semantic memory, at least as measured by the object permanence task, develops within the first 2 years of life. The emergence of object permanence and representational skills is related to the child acquisition of words that pertain to appearance and disappearance of objects such as algon and more. The last, episodic memory, is related to children's ability to understand language in a personal way. It is likely that the emergence of episodic memory is related to the child's acquisition of personal pronouns such as I, me, and mine. I think enough. Back to Lulu.
Okay, thank you guys for your explanation. This is our presentation about I think it's all about our presentation. Thanks for your attention and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Wabarakatuh.